On that overcast September morning, Jenny Miller stood behind the counter at the Brookstone Diner, setting coffee cups on the worn Formica countertop, as she had every Monday since she started there 7 years ago. The town of Halvers, in the middle of Kansas, was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down and faces never changed. Jenny, at 34, lived a routine life. She woke up before the sun, tied her red hair into a makeshift bun, put on her pale blue apron with permanent grease stains, and rode her bike across the quiet town to the diner. She was known for her quiet kindness and for keeping her distance from other people's business, and she expected the same in return. But that all began to change one Thursday when a boy quietly walked through the front door without asking for anything and sat down at the same table in the left corner near the window each time. He must have been 9, maybe 10, and he wore a grey hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big and jeans stained with dirt. His shoes were worn in a way that only someone who walked a lot would recognize. For the first few days, Jenny watched from afar. The boy didn't talk to anyone. He just sat and stared out the window, as if he were waiting for time to pass quickly. He never ordered a coffee. He never even opened the menu. At first, the customers murmured curiously, and some waiters wanted to send him away, but Jenny asked them to leave him alone. On the 3rd day, she decided to take action. She made a simple pancake with honey, discreetly placed it in front of him, and simply said, "Please eat." He hesitated, but ate every last crumb. From then on, she repeated the gesture every day, even without knowing his name, even when the whispers began to bother him more than the noise from the kitchen. Jenny and the boy's routine was taking shape in silence. He always arrived around 7:10, sat at the same table, waited without looking around too much, and ate whatever she put in front of him. Sometimes scrambled eggs, other times a grilled cheese sandwich, always with a portion of fruit or a glass of milk. He never said anything. Not a thank you or a good morning, but Jenny hadn't expected that either. There was something about his presence, that withdrawn manner, his deep-set eyes that seemed to carry a weight no child should bear, that made her understand that words might be an additional burden. Even so, she worried. She noticed the circles under his eyes, his thin arms, the way he discreetly glanced at the other dishes in the restaurant as if he were still hungry. And each dish she paid for out of her own pocket was a silent protest against the abandonment he seemed to carry on his small shoulders. As the weeks passed, the comments from the other employees became more pointed. "Are you doing charity work for nobody's kid, Jenny?" Chuck the cook once grumbled. "He won't even talk to you. Maybe he's just taking advantage." And the customers started to get annoyed too. In a small town like Halvers, anything out of the ordinary becomes a topic of conversation. People told her she was encouraging strange behavior, that it wasn't right to feed a strange boy without knowing anything about him. Jenny listened to it all and kept doing the same thing. She never answered, never tried to justify herself. Her gut instinct screamed that there was a bigger reason for it all, and even if there wasn't, it was still the right thing to do. One particularly cold morning, she left a note on his plate. "If you ever need help, just call me." He read it silently, folded the paper carefully, and put it in his pocket without saying anything. It was the first time she realized that, even without words, he was listening. By the morning of the 29th time he showed up, Jenny had learned the pattern. She would arrive early, clear the table, fold the napkin into a triangle, and set the plate down just as he opened the door. But that day, the door didn't open. The clock ticked past 7:10, 7:15, then 7:30. The window seat was empty. Jenny glanced out at the street every 5 minutes, pretending to be serving coffee. The grey sweatshirt didn't show up, not that day or the next. For 3 days in a row, she set the plate down, and for 3 days she returned with it untouched. She began to wonder if he had moved to another city, been taken by someone, or even if something worse had happened. The thought of those possibilities tightened her chest in a way she couldn't explain. A sense of emptiness took over her routine, and Jenny began to doubt whether what she had done had any real effect. Did he miss her? Did she really make a difference? The atmosphere in the restaurant changed. Customers noticed the empty bench, and the employees, now at a loss for words, simply stopped talking. Jenny, who was already a reserved figure, became even more withdrawn. The boy's absence became a kind of invisible hole inside the Brookstone diner, as if a ghost had taken up residence there. And it was just when everything seemed to have returned to its old normal. The routine boredom, the automated service, the repetitive orders, that on an ordinary morning, something completely unexpected happened. It was 8:04 a.m. when 4 black SUVs, gleaming as if they had just left the dealership, parked in a line right in front of the restaurant. People stopped eating. Jenny froze, holding the coffee pot in her hand. The tinted windows, the men in uniforms getting out of each car, the sudden silence that took over the room. It was as if a movie had invaded the city's reality. No one knew what was happening, but everyone felt that this was no ordinary visit. One of the men, tall, with a rigid posture and impeccably dressed, opened the door to the restaurant firmly, but without hostility. His eyes scanned the room until they found Jenny, standing behind the counter with her hand still holding the coffee pot. He walked toward her with firm steps, took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket, and, in a low but confident voice, said, "Mrs. Miller, this is for you." The envelope was thick, sealed with the crest of the United States Army. Jenny took the paper with shaking hands, not knowing what to expect. The officer remained silent, as if his very presence said it all. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter in firm handwriting. The first words were like a punch in the stomach. "If you're reading this, it's because I haven't come back." Jenny's heart raced. The letter was signed by Captain Daniel Thompson, and the contents were more than she could have ever imagined. He explained that before he left for his last overseas deployment, he had left his son, Adam, with his mother, hoping to protect him. But after his death in combat was confirmed, his mother had abandoned the boy, and he wandered off on his own. Adam had no one left. In the paragraphs that followed, Daniel described how much he feared that his son would lose faith in people, and how he dreamed that somewhere someone with a decent heart would cross his path. He thanked Jenny, not for the coffee, not for the pancakes, but for seeing Adam, for not treating him as invisible, for offering him dignity at a time when he needed it most. The last words were the ones that caught her throat the hardest. "Thank you for giving him something that even I, alive, could not have given him, a pure gesture with nothing in return." Jenny finished reading the letter with trembling hands and teary eyes, while the entire restaurant remained completely silent. No one dared to move. Most of the customers had already stopped pretending not to pay attention. The officer nodded slightly to the other men who were still near the entrance. One of them approached with a small black case in his hands and handed it to Jenny with the same ceremonial respect. Inside was a military insignia, carefully sewn into dark blue velvet, and next to it was a photo of Adam with his father, smiling. Jenny clutched the object to her chest, unable to hold back the tears. For the first time, the boy had a name, a past, a story, and it all made sense. Every dish, every silent glance, every ignored whisper. He was now part of something much bigger than she could ever imagine. The officer explained that after tracking the boy's whereabouts, they found security camera footage and reports of his constant presence at the restaurant. That was how they found her. The letter had been written by Daniel shortly before his final mission, given to the army with clear instructions. If anything happened to him, and if they discovered that his son was missing, they were to seek out anyone who had shown him genuine compassion. Jenny didn't know what to say. The words seemed small compared to what was happening, but still, something inside her shifted, a kind of peace she had never felt before. From that moment on, the emptiness Adam had left at the corner table had transformed into something deeper, a purpose. She didn't know where he was at that moment, but now she was certain that he was no longer alone, and somehow, neither was she. In the days that followed, the story spread through the city like a whirlwind that no one could contain. People who had previously whispered at the tables in the back now entered the restaurant with a different expression, not of judgment, but of respect. Some left tips larger than the price of their meal. Others asked to sit at the boys' table. The Brookstone Diner itself took on a new meaning. It was no longer just a place for cheap coffee and bacon-grilled bread. It was a place where a silent gesture had touched a life and reverberated through hundreds of others. Jenny, however, did not change her ways. She still served the same dishes with the same simplicity, but now she made a point of preparing an extra meal every day and having it ready, even if no one showed up to eat it. One afternoon, while she was wiping down the counter, she found the old note she had written to Adam, still tucked away on the small shelf by the cash register, folded the same way he had tucked it in his pocket weeks ago. She opened it again, as if trying to find something she had missed. The sentence was short, but it carried all the feeling of his gesture. "If you ever need help, just call me." In that moment, she realized that somehow he had called her. Not with words, not with requests, but with presence. It was the kind of call that only those who listen with their hearts can hear, and Jenny had heard it. His absence was not an end. It was a new beginning. And even though she didn't know if she would ever see him again, she felt that her life would never be the same again. The following week, Jenny decided to put a small picture frame on the windowsill of the table where Adam usually sat. In it, she put the photo she had received from the army, father and son smiling, hugging. It wasn't to draw attention to themselves, nor was it a public tribute. It was simply to ensure that the space would never again be seen as empty. Some customers asked who it was, and Jenny, in the same calm tone as always, would say, "Someone who taught me that a plate of food can be worth 1,000 words." The answer was enough. No one insisted. Over time, others began to do the same. Not exactly with photos, but with their actions. A man who had previously refused to share a table with strangers began buying coffee for truck drivers. A young teacher began leaving children's books in a basket at the entrance to the restaurant. Jenny's gesture had gradually become a silent seed that was germinating in every corner of the city. There were no grand speeches, no plaques of recognition, no articles in the capital's newspaper. But for those who knew Halvers, it was impossible to ignore the change. The restaurant became a meeting place for people who had previously barely looked at each other. Families began to visit more often. Groups that had never mixed before now shared space without resistance. Jenny observed all this with the same reserved posture, but there was a new light in her eyes, a calm firmness in her gestures. And in the midst of this transformation, she rediscovered a feeling that had not visited her heart for years: belonging. For the first time since her mother passed away and her father left for another state, she felt that she was part of something bigger, that her presence, silent and constant, had left deep and good marks in other lives. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Jenny was organizing the napkins when she heard the doorbell ring. It wasn't an unusual sound, but there was something different about it. Maybe the time it took for it to close, or the silence that followed. When she looked up, she saw a boy standing in the middle of the room, not so small anymore. His shoulders were still hunched, but his eyes, the same. He was taller, dressed in clean clothes, with a backpack on his back, and this time he was carrying an envelope in his hands. He walked up to the counter and handed it to her without saying a word. Jenny took the envelope slowly. Inside was a simple card. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." And right below it, a shaky signature. Adam T. No other explanation, no drama. Just confirmation that he was okay, that he had come back to tell her this, not with grand gestures, but in the same way she had cared for him, with silence, presence, and truth. After Adam left, Jenny stood there for long minutes, holding the card as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She just took a deep breath and went back to work. That was her life now. Serving, welcoming, listening, even when no one said anything. The Brookstone Diner was never the same again, but not because it got busier or prettier. It was because there, in that forgotten corner of Kansas, an ordinary woman decided to feed a boy that everyone ignored. And because of that, an entire history was rewritten. Not with speeches, promises, or miracles, but with hot meals, perseverance, and the courage to follow her heart even when the whole world said otherwise. Jenny didn't make the news, but she became an example. And in the end, that was what mattered most.